Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This week's Wargaming terrain tutorial, we're going to be looking at making some really simple scatter terrain. We're going to be making these power poles, or telegraph poles if you like. Now this idea came from one of my Patreon supporters. I want to say thank you very much to those guys for all their help and support. It's great seeing some of your ideas on the Discord server as well. If you'd like to support the channel in that way, please head on over to my Patreon page. I'll have a link for it in the description below. This will be a nice quick build, something you can whip up easily in a day. I hope you enjoy this one. Remember to hit like and subscribe if you do. Let's get started. Alright guys, so for this video we're just using some really simple materials as I mentioned. Most of these things I found at the cheap shop. We've got some 4mm round skewers. I've got these little square ones here as well. I'm not sure exactly what these are used for, but they turned out perfect for this build. So I found those in the kitchen section at the cheap shop. And I've also made myself just a couple of really small MDF bases. That's just 3mm MDF that I've cut into sort of organic shapes there, and I'm using these little nails here that I picked up at the hardware store as well. So nothing here is too expensive. I will be dressing up this build towards the later half of the video with some Army Painter basing products just to bring it all together and make them look a little bit fancier. They work great for this purpose. I won't be adding too much paint or anything to this build, just a bit of a wash on the timbers. Now I'm cutting these down to just over 13 centimeters long. I found the easiest way to cut these was with garden shears, you can see there, but you can also use a craft knife, it's fine, it'll cut through these. As you can see, you just roll it under your knife there a few times and it will eventually cut through this. It does give you a nice clean cut to do it this way, it's just a little bit more labour intensive I suppose. You do want to check the height of your telegraph poles here to make sure that they are what you're going to want for your tabletop, so they fit the scale. Found about 13 and a bit centimeters was just about right. Now you do want to measure up your crossbars for this telegraph pole as well, so I think these ones here were about 5 centimeters long and they work perfect just for across the top. If you want to, you can weather up these little skewers in the cross beams. We used this technique before in a few other videos. Just a little piece of hacksaw blade works perfect for this, and you can see here once it comes into focus it does get some lines on there, and when we apply the wash you'll be able to see those. Gives it a bit more of a weathered look. So it does look quite good at the end of the day, just with a little bit of scraping with that hacksaw blade. So not a lot of work in that at all, really simple to do. I found it's probably easier to weather up these before you cut them down, these crossbars, so you can weather the entire skewer and then cut them down to that size you want. So as you can see there, they're about 5 centimeters across, and I'm just going to mark in the middle here where I want this first hole. So this is where we're going to actually attach a nail through into the round skewer or telegraph pole itself. So we just mark out the middle area of the crossbeam and then just hit it with our little hand drill here. Now I'm using a bit here that is going to be just enough thickness to push these nails through. You don't want them too loose, but at the same time you don't want to have to hammer this through. You want to be able to just push it through and pull it out when you need to. We'll be gluing these in at the end of the day anyway. So next thing you want to do is we're going to mark the little, I'm not sure what they're called, but the little things that sit on top of these cross beams. And we're also going to be drilling through our holes to mount cross beams on. So when I drilled those holes into the round skewer here, I drilled 2 for 2 cross beams. Make sure that they are lined up when you put the second one in. And you probably don't want to drill all the way through. It really doesn't matter if you do, but you don't want the nail to protrude through to the other side. So we'll be cutting those nails down to the right size. So you don't need to drill all the way through on the pole itself, just on the cross beams. Now I'm just testing here to make sure that this is going to fit and they're going to be alright and look the way I want them to look. I'll make sure that they're at the right height. I've made these just a little bit lower than the top of the pole, just so they look a little bit more like real life telegraph poles. Now to drill these little holes in the top, again I'm just using my pencil here to mark these out, just so I get a pretty consistent gap between all these little things at the top that hold the wire. That's the technical term I'm sure, but anyway. Find it's best if you mark this stuff out first, just so you can make sure that these holes do look rather symmetrical across this crossbeam. So again with this, you don't want to probably drill all the way through these ones. It won't matter too much if you do, so it's not it's not worth throwing it away if you accidentally do go all the way through. You just want to make sure that when you put the nails in here that they don't protrude through to the other side of the crossbeam. Now for cutting the nails, I found a pair of pliers was the easiest way to do this. I didn't measure this at all, I just basically grabbed the end of the nail and cut it down to what I think is going to be enough to go through the first crossbeam and just slightly into the pole. This is probably more for looks than anything. It's not going to be overly functional as far as holding it on there. We're going to be using some super glue to attach these cross beams anyway, but it does look cool having this little nail in place that looks like it's holding the cross beam in there. So again, just test fitting it, making sure that it's not going to protrude out the front or the back of the pole too much. It's probably not going to fit too flush because that hole we drilled is pretty much the diameter of the nail, so the nail has a little head on it which is going to stick out a bit, but I found that looked fine anyway. It still looked really good, so no need to really worry too much about that. Again, I'm not measuring these up, just basically, you know, eyeballing it to make sure that it's going to be enough to fit through the crossbeam and slightly into the pole. Now when you come to do these top ones, you do want to make sure that you are test fitting these first. You'll probably have different depths of drilled hole on the top here, so some of these are going to sit at different heights. So test these in there first. You might want to drill your hole a little bit deeper or just trim down your nail a little bit shorter. Once I've got these in there and tested and make sure they look alright, the next thing I'm going to do is probably work at gluing these up. So it doesn't matter if they're a little bit off. You can see there some of these aren't exactly perfect, but you can sort of, because that hole we drilled is it's a bit of a press fit, so you should be able to move these around before you glue them. Now, the easiest way to do this is before you attach the cross beams, obviously. So the nail in the middle there to hold it to the pole is not glued yet. We're not going to worry about gluing that one until we actually attach it. Found the easiest way here is to go through, take them out and put a dab of glue and drop them back in there. So this will take a couple of minutes to get through, but it's really simple once you've got them all in place and test fitted. And you probably want to do these each one at a time, just because, like I said, the different depths of the hole you drilled will make sure that each nail you've put in place and measured up is going to be the right nail for the right hole. So once you've got that done and they're glued in place and dry, the super glue shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes. We can then attach these straight onto the pole. Now when attaching these, don't necessarily need these to be exactly at 90 degrees to the pole. A little bit off center or a little bit on a slight angle, it works really well for these, especially because they are, you know, part of a you know, post-apocalyptic sort of scene, so these aren't functioning in any way. The wires will be broken and some of these are starting to fall down and be very weathered, so I found having these a little bit skewed from the pole is just perfect. So as you can see there, they're not in the right angles or anything, but they look really good. So I'll just go through and fit both of these power poles up. For this one, for this second one here, what I'm actually going to do is make this one a broken power pole. Now initially I thought I was going to have this just sort of broken as you see there and sort of sitting down and hanging there, but I realized with this bamboo skewer it was really not stable enough to keep it in that sort of orientation, so I end up breaking that one off completely, and it works a lot better that way. It's just easier to attach it to the base and I've got less chance of that coming apart and breaking and being two separate pieces down the track. Now for the bases, I'm actually going to drill in here. I know these skewers are 4mm wide, so I'm going to be using a 4mm drill bit to make sure that these are a nice tight fit into the base. From there we'll be when we go to do the actual basing on this, the glue that I put on to apply the basing materials will be enough to hold this in. So it's a pretty tight fit anyway. So once you sort of get this pressed in, you don't need these to be standing exactly upright. I did a couple couple of different variations of this. So I've got this one on a bit of a lean, did another one that was straight up and down. Just whatever you feel is right for your tabletop, just go with it. You probably don't want to put these on too much of a lean though. They will be a bit top heavy and maybe a little unstable if you try to go too far with the angle on these. So now for this broken power pole, here I'm going to drill the hole just a little bit off center. That's going to give me enough room then to glue the broken part of this power pole to the base and have it pretty stable on there. So anything like this one, you probably want to, like I said, make it a little bit off center so you've got a little bit more room on that base to glue down the power pole. So it's pretty much at this point here where I realized that this configuration isn't going to work the best with that power pole sort of still half hanging on. I would have liked to have made this one work at this stage, but it's just really not quite stable enough and I'm really concerned that's going to break. So you can see here I've actually snapped it off now and decided to just glue the broken part of this broken top half here straight to the base. So adding a little bit of super glue to both parts, just put that in place there and that's going to work fine. Now I've made sure to tilt the power pole so that the bit that is extending off the base is actually contacting the tabletop as well. So that just stops it from wobbling and doing funny things on the table. So here I'm going to use some Army Painter Brown Battleground, just with some watered down Mod Podge. You could use a thicker glue here, it doesn't really matter. I found this worked fine, it held it on there. As long as you go back over it with another coating of glue once you put your basing material on there, as you'll see me do shortly, this will hold on really nicely. You want to put a fairly liberal amount on, so not too thin, because you do want this gravel, this Brown Battleground from Army Painter to sort of hold when you do sprinkle it on. So make sure you put a fair amount on there. Now to do this really simple, you just basically throw it all on there. Too much is fine. What doesn't stick to the glue or what doesn't grab to the glue that we've placed on there will just fall off as we tilt it on the side after we apply this on here. We are going to be using a couple of other Army Painter products just to dress these up, so just a couple of tufts that I'm going to use, and we're also going to use some slightly larger pieces of gravel or rock that I found in the backyard just to finish these as well. So once you get that gravel on there, just give it a slight tilt, a little bit of a tap, tip it over to make sure you get all the loose pieces off, and we'll move on and finish the second one in exactly the same fashion, and then we can start looking at weathering this up and adding our grass tufts and a little bit of paint on there. As you can see, exact same process here, just adding on the gravel, fairly liberal amounts here. Make sure you get it all the way to the edges. Wherever you've got glue, make sure it's on there. When you're putting the glue on this one, make sure you don't glue up the pole or onto the pole that's laying on the ground. You don't want gravel to be stuck there too much. It will sort of detract from the realism of this piece. So when you're putting the glue on, make sure you're a bit careful with it. Now here I'm just using a dropper to go around and just add this to the top of all that gravel. This will just help make sure it sets and doesn't start falling off down the track or as we pick it up and move it around. So I'm using an eyedropper. You could certainly just use a paintbrush and dip it on there. So long as if you're using a paintbrush, just make sure that the first layer of glue is sort of mostly dry. That'll just help stop it from the gravel from grabbing onto your paintbrush as you dip it on there. Now for the wires on this one, I'm actually going to use a piece of black cotton. Initially I tried using a piece of fishing line, but I found it too rigid. I think this cotton tends to fall down and look a little bit more natural as a hanging piece of wire. The scale of this is fine. You might want to just add a little dab of glue to the crossbar underneath, just to sort of have this piece of cotton sort of touching that, so it doesn't look like it's hanging out. So you can see there it's kind of in a fairly wide sort of arc at the top here where it's hanging. So you might want to just a little bit of glue on the second crossbar down underneath once this first bit of glue is dry, and then you can attach it directly to that. Now when it came to painting these, I used just a brown mix of paint that you can see there. It's very watered down. I went around the edges of the base first, and just on the edges of the base where I didn't have gravel, just to cover up any of the exposed MDF that you can see there. So I'm just going to go through and cover the edges of this base, and I'm going to use the exact same coat of paint on the pole and the cross beams themselves. I didn't worry about painting the nails on the cross beams. These look fine as they are. Again, I'm just trying for a quick build here, so I want to sort of whip these out really quickly. I'll spend a lot of time on them. So this is just a nice, quick, easy way to get those looking pretty good, as you can see there. Now one of the last steps for this is to use these tufts. So I'm using the Army Painter Deadland tufts, and I'm also going to use some of these Woodland tufts as well. These two tufts, whilst they're very, very different, I think they work pretty well together on this gravel. We're not going to paint up the gravel or wash it in any way. I like the look of this. I like it how it looks against the colour of the telegraph poles. And these two grass tufts sort of complement it quite well. I like having the green ones in there, really sort of give it a point of difference. And the Deadland tufts look about right for this kind of gravelly, sandy terrain, I suppose. So just a quick dab of PVA glue onto the bottom of these tufts. Place them where you need to. Just a few on each one, and I think they come up looking pretty good. So the last thing I did here was just to add a little bit of gravel, so some larger rocks to the base. This is just crusher dust. I think they, find it around concrete paths and stuff like that. Stuff was perfect. And that's pretty much it. These got table ready. As you can see, these turned out really good. They look great on that battle mat we made in the last video. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. I hope you give this one a go. If you've got any suggestions or questions about the build or any tips of your own, feel free to share them in the comments below. Appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you in the next one.